Hey Warhammer World, this is Obsidian Anubis, and I'm back with a ninth Age battle report. So this is the second in a group of battle reports for the Waaargh to the OFCC. So those of you unfamiliar with the OFCC, it is a tournament we have out here in the Pacific Northwest, which is at the end of July, which I am going to. And if anybody who is watching this is going to, I will be happy to see you there. We can talk shop. So for this tournament, I'm bringing my Orcs and Goblins, or Sharnark's Desert Horde, who I will be impersonating today. So I'm going to be a Feral Orc General. Yeah, we the best. And I'm going to be playing against an opponent who's playing Empire of Sonstal. So we're going to look at the list. So over here on the left flank of my opponent, they have 3 Elephants with Lance and Shield, and they also have Full Command, although it's not noted there. Next to that is a cannon and a volley gun on top of a hill with the dancing hula girl. Those little dancers there. There's also an artificer with the two war machines, so he can bounce between the two depending on which turn he wants to use it on. And back there's also another level 1 light wizard with a dispel scroll. The half-naked guy over there. I'm gonna fill him with some arrows. What does he think he is? A feral orc? Empire can't be. Feral orcs? That's for the greenskins. Anyways, next to them is a group of 10 electoral cavalry with full command. And then to the right of that is a large group of halberdiers. And in that front left corner of the guy with the banner, that is the Captain BSB with the Hammer of Might. Behind them is a group of 40 Imperial Guard with full command and war banner. And in that group is a light wizard who looks like a fire wizard, but he's pretending to be a light wizard for this one at least. So there's the 40 halberdiers with full command. Next to them is a group of 10 light infantry with a level 4 light wizard with the Earthengrod. So that little bald guy there has a little bald cap on to fit in nicely. Behind those group, we have Jaime Lannister, or Prelate, with Fencer's Blade, Glittering Cuirass, and the Alto of Battle. And then to the right of that, we have the 13 Electoral Cavalry with full command and the Banner of Speed. And next to that is another volley gun being proxied by the Hellblaster volley gun, or excuse me, by the missile gun, whatever it's called. And then for my Sharnark's Horde, coming out of the desert, so of course I have Sharnark's Horde, which is 33 Savage Orc Headbashers with full command, additional hand weapons, and the Relentless Icon. Next to them are the Waaargh's Shiny Rocks Iron Orcs. They have full command, plate armor, and the Ironhide Icon. And if you guys have watched my previous battle report, you'll notice that much more of those orcs are painted. So I'm finishing those guys up for the tournament, so they're going to look fabulous. And behind them, I have 5 Boar Riders with hand weapons. And I also have 4 characters in this picture. In the Iron Orcs, I have Waaargh Shiny Rock himself. He's the desert-colored Iron Orc. He is an Iron Orc chief with the dirk and hardened shield, and he has the Wizarding hat, although it's really more of a Wizarding helmet, but, you know, close enough. In the group with the Boars, I have a Feral Orc Shaman with a level 2 Wilderness. He has a Dispel Scroll and a War Boar. And then in the large Savage Orc group, I have Sheragor, which is a Feral Orc BSB. He has paired weapons, the Waaargh Paint, Mithril Mill, and the Obsidian Pebble. And he's actually the Feral Orc with the gigantic axe, kind of in the front middle there. And the very far right, you can just see the boar, is Sharnak Swine Rider himself, or myself, I am a Feral Orc Warboss with a Warboard and Shield. I have the Axe of Battle and the Crystal Ball and Plates of Tuk-Tuk, who I know I spelled that wrong, but I'm an Orc. I can't spell. It happens. And over here on my right flank, I have a group of 5 Desert Spider Raiders with throwing weapons. Those will actually have just been placed there. They actually will scout next to the Iron Orcs once they actually do scouting. In front of this picture, I have 46 Tunnel Goblins with nets, spears, and shields, full command, and 3 Madgets. And then next to that, I have my Feral Giant with war paint. And I know he's a little small for a giant, but I love the Lord of the Rings model, so I had to throw him in there. And then finally, over here on my far left flank, I have 20 Desert Goblins, which are skirmishers and with throwing weapons. And then my Double D-Rock, which has a web launcher. And outside of this picture on the left, on a small hill, is my Git launcher. So if we look at the table as a whole, we can see that it's this diagonal deployment, and with the secondary objectives being secure the target. You can see one of them at the bottom of this picture behind my boars. There's a little amber gem. That's one of them. The other one is behind my opponent's large group of knights. It's a small blue one in case you see it in later pictures. And again, the Spider Riders are actually not there. They will be placed once scouts have been placed, which is to the right of the Iron Orcs. So for magic, my Iron Orc Chief rolled up Lore of Light, So he had the Shield of Protection and Divine Banishment, and my Savage Orc Shaman had Curse of the Wildwood and the Beast Within. So this game, me and my opponent, rotated deploying just a unit at a time until we were about halfway done, and then I threw down the rest of my list, which gave me basically a +3 to my roll to my opponent. But of course, I rolled a 1 and my opponent rolled a 6, so they still got the first turn. Darn it. Alright, so Empire of Sonsal, turn 1. So for movement, my opponent just moved up the knights a little bit, the elephants, the 10 knights, and the 13 knights. Other than that, the rest of the battle line remained pretty solid. Since we were close to this turn, my opponent didn't have to move closer to cast spells, a mistake that they made in the previous game. For magic, they only got 3 power dice. Of course, I threw all 3 at Divine Banishment on my Feral Orcs. I didn't have enough dice to stop it, so 2 Iron Orcs got to go meet the great green gods. In shooting, the Hellblaster on the right shot and killed 5 Iron Orcs. That hurt. That was a painful loss there. And on the left flank, the other one shot at my goblins and killed 5, which isn't nearly as bad. Goblins are cheap. That's why we throw them in first. My opponent's cannon, of course, aimed and targeted at my double D-Rock and hit and did 2 wounds. So at least it didn't manage to do all the wounds like it did previously. Or max wounds, I should say. And with that is the end of my opponent's turn. So I'm going just to Sharnak's Horde, turn 1. Whoa! So, being a typical orc, I just declared the Waaargh on the first turn, as we were only, 18 inches away max, but since my opponent moved up the knights, they were within charge range of both my ferals, which I needed an 11 on 3 dice, and my Iron Orcs, which I needed a 10 on 3 dice. So I declared a charge with my Goblin Spider Riders into the volley gun, which they made it. Fantastic. My Iron Orcs and my Ferals both charged the Knights. My Ferals only stumbled forward a couple inches, but my Iron Orcs made the long distance charge, so that was fantastic. Other than that, I didn't move too much. I did move the double D-Rock into the small forest over here to getting out of line of sight of the elephants. And then for magic, I rolled 6 power dice, and I attempted to cast the Shield of Protection on the Iron Orcs. My opponent dispelled it, and then I attempt to cast the boosted version, because I was out of range for the lower version, of Beast Within on my Iron Orcs, and I failed that. So no magic the first turn. Darn. Alright, let's get the shooting. My Get Launcher aimed and hit and killed 2 of these knights, so that was fantastic. Very happy Goblin who met his death there. In close combat, my spiders easily ate up the crew and overran into the flank of the knights. And in close combat with the knights, I killed a total of 4 knights, and my opponent killed 3 Iron Orcs. Unfortunately, my opponent did hold because the general is easily within range, as was the BSB. This is what the table looks like at the end of turn 1, which brings us to turn 2, Empire of Sonsal. So my opponent declared a charge with the elephants into my skirmishing desert goblins. They elected to flee away from the small pond. That gigantic styrofoam block, by the way, is a pond, even though it doesn't look like one. I promise you it is. I'm an orc. Trust me when I say these things. So my opponent decided to redirect into my large group of tunnel goblins, which I elected to hold and release fanatics. This is before my opponent took the wounds, and this was after, so I managed to kill off 1 elephant and put 1 wound on another, which I thought was a little below average. I actually think I rolled below average on all my dice as my opponent ran through my mad gets, so that was a little disappointing, but what can you do? For magic, my opponent rolled 8 power dice, which again they decided to target my Feral Orcs with Divine Banishment, and they managed to get 1 of them off. So 1 of them I dispelled, but because they had the War Alto, they unfortunately got the second one off and killed, I think, 3 Feral Orcs. In shooting, my opponent with the cannon targeted the double D-Rock and did another 2 wounds, so at least my opponent's rolling minimum so far, but it's still half a wound, so that definitely hurts. The volley guns, the one on the right has been destroyed, and the one on the left, I don't think it had a target. I think everything was out of range, so it didn't shoot it this turn. In close combat, my Iron Orcs went to town. They beat up 6 of the knights and only lost, I think, 2 in return. My opponent's knights broke, and my... Or did they break? Maybe they didn't break. Oh, no, they did break, but I overran, and stopped when I got too close to my spiders. I believe that's what happened. In close combat over here, yeah, my opponent squashed quite a few goblins, but I am steadfast, so easily held. You can also see that this is a picture of my opponent charging the other group of knights into my giant, which I forgot to say they did. So they charged into the giant, and I believe the giant rolled the number 1, what just bellows, so I automatically won combat by 2, but my opponent easily held. So that brings us to Starnock's Horde, turn 2. Waaargh! So like I said, I overran, and looks like I overran into the flank of the Waaargh. Excuse me, sorry about that. I also charged my feral orcs with my general into the flank of the knights, which I will show you a picture later on, which I think was a huge mistake on my part, and I'll go through that in more detail when I show you a picture of that. Other than that, you can see that my Spider Riders, they went and chased the knights down and ended up catching them way back there. For magic, I rolled 3 power dice, which I think I threw all 3 at the Beast Within on my feral orcs, and I either failed it or my opponent dispelled it. Either way, it didn't go off. So in close combat, I only managed to put 1 wound on the Waaargh, and I think they managed to kill 1 orc in return. I won combat res, but my opponent was stubborn and held. Yeah, and so here's the picture that I think was a bumbling mistake on my part. Sorry, I'm a feral orc. I see a flank, I charge it, even if it's not the most sensible thing to do. So this is after combat, so I easily broke and wiped out the knights. Actually, I think I killed them to a man. They didn't even break. However, you can see the way I charged is if I overran, which being a feral orc I have to overrun, I couldn't go very far because I had poorly placed them next to the giant, so I had to stop an inch away from my giant, which left my flank easily exposed to my opponent. So if I was to charge them in the flank, I think I should have aligned it better so that if I overran, I would have overrun in front of the giant, and that way I would have overrun at least into the elephants and hopefully wiped them out. As it is, the way I positioned it, I just bounced off the giant, which was a terrible placement by my part. But what I really think I should have done is I should have charged the general out of the unit into the flank of the knights, because he by himself, I think, killed 5 knights when he went into combat, leaving only like 2 for the giant to kill. And then the feral orcs didn't even have a target after that. So I think I should have charged the general out into the flank and just moved the rest of the ferals up to kind of cover his flank and to threaten the halberdiers. But as it stands, you know, I'm a feral orc, I'm bloodthirsty. When I see a flank, I gotta go after it. In close combat with the elephants, I took another handful of wounds, but I did manage to put 2 more wounds onto the one elephant that was injured already, so there's only 1 elephant left. Luckily, with spears, I have lethal strike against these elephant cavalry, so although I'm losing goblins in droves, at least I'm eventually going to whittle those elephants down, I hope. So that brings us to Empire of Sonsal, turn 3. So as expected, my opponent easily countercharged the flank of my ferals, which, being a feral orc, I could do nothing but stand. So still kicking myself after this. In magic phase, my opponent got 4 power dice, and I think they threw all of them at blinding speed on the halberdiers. I tried to dispel it, but I failed. In shooting, the volley gun shot at the boar boys and killed 3, and the cannon once more shot at my Waaargh and did 3 more wounds. Oh, excuse me. I'm gonna go back stage. The handgunner shot at the boar boys and killed 3. The cannon shot at the spider and did another 3 wounds, and then the volley gun shot at the spider and finished him. Poor DD off. So my double D-Rock has yet to get into close combat. Ugh! One day I will promise I will get that spider into close combat and see what she can do. Going to close combat, it was more or less a push here. I lost a few goblins, but I'm still steadfast and easily held. Yeah, okay. Whew. Close combat here. It was bloody. My opponent, I don't remember exactly how many they killed. I don't remember how many. I only had 3 orcs on the flank, so I didn't kill a whole lot. But I lost combat by 6 between all the ranks, the flanks, and everything. So I lost combat by 6. My leadership is 9 with my feral orc. So I rolled the dice. I rolled like a 10. Okay, well, luckily I have a BSB. Picked up the dice, rolled again, snake eyes. So I held. That with the plus 6, that brought my leadership to 8, and my leadership was 9. So luckily I held. I lost combat, but I held. And in close combat over here with the Alto, I did 3 wounds to it with my Iron Orcs, but again it was stubborn and failed to flee. So this brings us to Charnock's Horde, turn 3. Alright, so I charged my giant into the front of the halberdiers there, hoping I can maybe rescue my poor feral orcs. Looks like you in the picture, you look like you can see that I killed 5 halberdiers last turn with those 3 feral orcs, which isn't too bad. I also charged my wizard and remaining boars into the light infantry. My opponent stand and shot and killed 1, so it's only 1 other boar plus the wizard. In magic, I got 6 power dice, which I attempted to cast Beast Within on my feral orcs. I failed it. I then attempted to cast Shield's Protection on my iron orcs, on my feral orcs, and my opponent dispelled it. So I have yet to get a single spell off yet this game. I may have to sacrifice my wizards to the great green gods after this. Alright, however, in close combat, I did manage to wipe out or I think it finally broke, and I overran and or chased, caught, and wiped out and ran into the Imperial infantry who had turned the face. And in close combat with the feral orcs, I lost again a lot more than I did the first turn. I lost quite a few. My opponent still had blinding speed up, and I was unable to get any buffs out on my feral orcs, so I lost quite a few. And unfortunately, because they had hit me in the flank, I couldn't move any of my characters into combat. So I was just stuck with those 2 feral orcs there on the side who had not done much. Luckily, this picture was taken before my giant attacked, and my giant, oh boy, he ran in. He did swing with club. He rolled 11, and I think he killed 9 guys, plus he killed a few with thunder stomps. Thanks to him, I actually still lost combat, but I only lost by 2. So I easily passed my panic test or break test, and I was able to pass my reform test, so I could reform to face my opponent like this. So that giant saved my feral orcs right there. Way to go, giant. So that brings us to Empire of Sonsal, turn 4. This is what the battle looks like as a whole. You can see that my boar boys did manage to break the light infantry that had the wizard. They actually ran and fled on the other side of the iron orcs, a couple falling to dangerous terrain. However, they did manage to rally on this turn, unfortunately. Other than that, my opponent didn't have any movement. Going to magic, unfortunately, my opponent got a powerful magic phase and rolled 10 power dice. They threw 1 spell. I think they did Time Warp, and I scrolled that. Then I think they cast Shield Protection, which I used my dice to dispel, and then they got Blinding Speed, and I couldn't stop it. So once more, the halberdiers got blind speed. In shooting, the volley gun targeted and eliminated my 5 spiders who were swinging around, and the cannon shot and eliminated my feral wizard, shaman, and remaining boar boy. Ugh! Darting my opponent in the accurate artillery, they're blowing all my guys up. That's not how it's supposed to go. In close combat, my goblins finally managed to take off the final wound on the elephants. I did a post-combat pivot just to turn them like this and move them as far away from the guns as possible. In close combat, yeah, I lost a ton of feral orcs, but my opponent lost a ton of halberdiers thanks to my characters in giant. Actually, I think this was a cush, because I had killed so many between my giant and my characters that we actually tied combat. And so actually my musician was dead at this point, so I actually lost due to a draw, but I stood or remained in combat. In the upper corner with the Imperial Guard and the Iron Orcs, yeah, I killed a fair number, but they killed a fair number back. With the Great Weapons in Strength 6, Iron Orcs really have no protection against that, so I lost quite a few Iron Orcs, as you can see there. So that brings us to Sharnak's Horde turn 4. So I finally managed to cast my first spell this turn. I got a Shield of Protection on my Iron Orcs. I figured my Feral Orcs were going to die anyway, so I might as well try to save what I could on my Iron Orcs. So I managed to get Shield of Protection off on them. For shooting, my Git Launcher launched and killed, I think, 4 gunmen, which my opponent then failed the panic test and ran towards the edges of the board, but unfortunately it's still on, so hopefully they will continue fleeing next turn. And close combat, yeah, even with Shield of Protection, I lost all my Iron Orcs. My opponent just had so many attacks that came at me with Strength 6 that, yeah, only my character was left, and he unfortunately broke. My opponent chased and wiped him out. So, well, so much for Waaargh, Shiny Rock, and his orcs. They all died. In close combat with the Halberdiers, I only actually lost 1 feral orc, mainly because my opponent was targeting my characters and giant this turn, and failed to wound any of them. You can see I racked up quite a few bodies on my side. So my opponent, I think, needed Snake Eyes, not because Snake Eyes are automatic hold, just because that's what they needed, and they didn't get it, even with the BSB reroll. So my opponent fled, and I gave chase, and this is what it looks like at the end of that, at the end of turn 4. So this brings us to Empire of Sonsal, turn 5. So for movement, there wasn't a whole lot of movement. My opponent just turned the Imperial Guard around to face my Feral Orcs and Giant. For magic, my opponent got 7 power dice, and they threw 2 at Burning Brightness on my Giant. They rolled 2 sixes, as you can see here, so I went ahead and let them have it. My opponent, I think, rolled 3 for the number of hits and failed to wound my Giant at all, so that was lucky. And that ended my opponent's magic phase. And there was no close combat, so that brings us straight to Shonak's Horde, turn 5. So being a bloodthirsty feral orc that I am, and not wanting to withstand my opponent shooting, because I forgot to mention my opponent shot the volley gun at my remaining feral orcs, which killed the remaining feral orc, put 2 wounds on my general, and 1 wound on my BSB. So they were all badly injured, and the cannon put 2 wounds on the giant, so he had 5 wounds now, so he only had 1 wound remaining. So, to get out of that hail of lead, I decided to charge into the Imperial Guard. Probably not the best piece of wisdom to follow, but it's better than getting shot at, in my opinion. So I charged it in. My BSB issued a challenge, which my opponent accepted with their sergeant. I mainly did this so that my opponent would have less attacks towards my BSB. And this is what it actually looks like after combat. My opponent didn't manage to put a wound on anything, because they all had 1 wound remaining, and my opponent failed to do any wounds to anybody. Unfortunately, my opponent was steadfast and stuck. So that brings us to Empire of Sonsal, turn 6, which, again, no movement. Everybody was in combat. So straight to the magic. 9 power dice. They threw some at Time Warp. I dispelled that. They then threw Blinding Speed on the Imperial Guard. I didn't have any dice, and so my opponent got it off. And they ended the magic phase thusly. And this is what the picture looks like after combat. Again, my opponent, with this turn, my opponent did manage to kill off my BSB, so I just have my general and my giant in combat. I believe my giant rolled Brawl this turn, so I automatically won combat by 2. So my opponent had to make a break test, but they were still steadfast and easily passed. So this brings us to Shonak's Horde, turn 6. And I only have 1 picture remaining, and it's close combat. I did quite a few wounds, but unfortunately my opponent did manage to put both the wound on my general and my giant. So both of them died on the last turn of the game. How sad. Well, what you gonna do? And in this picture you can see the far right, you can see the tail of my little kitten who loves trying to eat little figures. Does not go well, trust me. So, how did this turn out? Well, it was an Empire for the Sonsal. 13-7. My opponent had the blue secure target. However, my Tunnel Goblins, which I had pulled out of range of my opponent's shooting, did manage to get the amber colored gem. So we each got 1, so no one got secondary objectives. So my opponent did win 13-7, so it was a minor loss for the Iron Orcs. Iron Orcs, Feral Orcs, Desert Orcs, Shonak's Horde, the Waaargh. So what could I have done differently? Well, as I said, I think charging the flank of the Knights with my Feral Orc Horde was probably what cost me the game. I think I should have, as I said, charged my my general out of the unit into his flank, and between him and the giant, they easily would have wiped out those knights, and then just moved my ferals up so my opponent would have charged the front. And although I would have lost a lot, I would have had a lot of attacks going back towards my opponent, and I think overall it would have been much better. For MVP, I think I still have to give it to my feral giant, so this is his 2nd MVP in a row. Both times he's charged into combat and done massive amounts of damage with his swing with club. I think last game it was 10 wounds. I think this game it was 9 wounds plus stomps. So he is definitely doing good. I know a lot of people don't like giants because they have this weird quirkiness where they can bellow, or they can do tons of wounds, or they can only do a single wound to a single target. But you know, they're fun, and I really like them. Plus I really like the model, so you know, I'm definitely biased that way. But other than that, I think that was a fantastic victory for my opponent. I think that we both had a great time playing that. I think next time my opponent is going to try a Saurian list, so I will hopefully maybe get my double D rock into close combat this time. Hopefully my opponent will not shoot my double D rock dead. So I'd like to see how that does in close combat. But other than that, if you guys have any comments or saw that I made any mistakes, please put those in the comment section below. I'm, as I said, going to the OFCC tournament at the end of this month, and I would hate to make mistakes there, so if you could call those out, that would be fantastic. Other than that, that's about all I have to say here, so if you guys can just hit like and subscribe, that would be fantastic. And as always, game on!